So podcast. I am Kaitlin.
And I'm Darbi. Today we've got one of my dearest, oldest friends, Lauren Dunn, joining us on this episode. I'm really excited about it because, we were talking about mental health last week with Curtis Browning. And then this week we have Lauren here. And I cannot wait for her to share her story. It's so cool. And she's also a therapist. And so she has all of this insight that she's bringing. So I hope y'all are ready for a really great episode.
I'm ready.
Lauren, thanks for coming, being a part of our Say So Adventures.
I'm glad to be here. Love the setup.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit. Let's just start from the beginning. Like, what's your story? Like, where did it start for you with mental health and just your passion for it?
I think from a really early age, I knew that I wanted to be a counselor since I was about 18. Mm-hmm. And just a little bit of my background and upbringing. My parents divorced when I was pretty little. I was about 4 or 5. And then through that time, I think, I really endured more of a season of loss. I lost all of my grandparents except for one, by the time I was a senior in high school. And my mom was engaged to a man that died when I was 13, and he lived with us. And so it was really hard, to walk through that. And then my parents my dad had a couple of pretty serious relationships, and those ended. And that was really, tough. Yeah. And then even seeing, some of the impact that I felt there. My mom now has 20 years in recovery, but did struggle, and so did my dad, with addiction for a long time. My dad kind of battled with addiction throughout his life, and had periods where he did pretty good and was able to help other people and leave a legacy in those ways. But it was tough. And as a kid, I was very high achieving and tried to really use a lot of my energy to work hard, study hard, be the best, do the best. And I think that's kind of how I learned to deal with my feelings. So I really felt pretty down and depressed, and that hit a little bit harder when I was in high school and kind of coming to age, and my brain was changing and I was moving into adolescence, and also struggled with anxiety. So I went on my own journey. Both of my parents got sober, and then kind of went on my own journey of learning how to just deal with me and to deal with life and my feelings, and felt very sad on and off for a long period of time. And I would say I struggled definitely with some very severe depression. And there were days where it was really hard and I didn't want to be here. And by the grace of God, I am here. And I would say leading up to that journey, my 20s there were good parts, there were bad parts. And I think I struggled with a lot of a lack of self-confidence, a lack of knowing who I was in Christ.
Yeah.
I met my husband when I was 26, and that really changed everything for me. I told Brian, I think he was kind of like a vessel of like how I really got to meet and understand who God was, I think through our marriage and his love for me.
Yeah.
That's really helped me to understand who God is.
That's so cool.
And so grew up a little bit in the church on and off, but never really knew God. And I think there's such a difference of like, you can go to church, you could know things, but I wasn't living life as a Christian and didn't really know God. I didn't know his significance. I didn't know who I was and my value until I really better understood God's love for me and what Jesus did for me. So I used to work for MHMR in Mineral Wells. I was an intensive case manager, and learned a lot there. Very humbling, good experience, but that's how I met Brian. So I was going to, leave, and I was closing out my charts, and Brian walked in, and Mineral Wells, out in the middle of nowhere. He's from Chicago, so it's very completely random.
Yeah.
But God is never random,
no.
and always has a plan and a purpose.
That's right.
So he walked in, and we met each other. I was dating somebody else, and that person wasn't a believer. As soon as I met Brian, I knew something was really different about him. And I think, now looking back, that's one, because he's a person I was supposed to marry, but also because the Holy Spirit lived inside of him. And you could really see that in him. And you still can. He's annoying sometimes, but I love him to death. And so anyway, we started marketing together. We were on a marketing team, and we were driving one day, and he asked if I wanted to recommit my life to Christ. And I feel like it's probably the first time that I ever really did. And we pulled over, and on the side, on the parking lot, there's a sign that said the right track. And I cried, and Brian prayed for me. Of course.
What a moment.
I know. It's hard to like keep it together, you know?
Yeah.
And he prayed and I prayed. And just from that moment, that was March 1st of 2013. And I still remember the day because at that moment, everything was different. It wasn't long after that my relationship with the guy that I was dating ended. And not long after that Brian and I started dating. And he says it wasn't missionary dating, right? I became a believer. And then we dated. But everything changed. And, you know, I had on part of that journey, it's not as if the depression went away because it was still there. And I still really struggled. And what was so amazing was that I worked and worked and worked. But I also think that God is so gracious. And, you know, I've had thoughts of not wanting to be here. It's been a long time. I mean, years. And sometimes I tell Brian that, you know, I remember looking in scripture over and over and highlighting and working with women that were mentors. And I went to counseling and, you know, I took medication for a little bit. And what was just so amazing was, though it was such a low point and such a hard time, I felt like the love of God like I'd never felt before. I think in those moments, in those valleys, sometimes it feels like even when we feel so far from God, he's so close to us. So it's such a, you know, beautiful and sweet time for me to really understand that. It wasn't long after that, you know, you and I have known each other for a long time, since we were 15, 16, and we reconnected. And I share that because I think it's really interesting when you give your life to God, there's like this natural pruning that takes place if you allow him to take the wheel.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So some of these people that, you know, were in my life and they were there for a season, but I saw God bring people back into my life like Darbi. And bring other women into my life and some really amazing and powerful mentors. And it, you know, it was really cool on that journey. But I think the thing that I'm always amazed by is I was so afraid to tell people of like that I struggled with depression or that my parents, you know, did this or just of my sin. And once I released that and I did a testimony for the 700 Club, that was so hard because my struggle is I really worry what people think about me. And it totally removed that. It was like the enemy couldn't use it anymore. And after that day, I really feel like whatever was inside of me, as weird as it sounds, it's like it was taken. It was removed. And so though, you know, sometimes I can feel down, it's like gone. Yeah. It's been, you know, 7, 8 years since I really felt that degree of sadness, and it's like unexplainable. It doesn't mean that I don't, you know, have tough days. It doesn't mean that I don't still struggle with anxiety, because that is true. But to have a freedom that I just didn't even know was possible in a life that I could never have imagined has been really profound and amazing. And I think the things that I do now is it doesn't, you know, having walked through loss in my life and losing people that I love, and my dad is gone, you know, as well. I'm always amazed that things don't work out the way that I think they will, but God is able to take my pain and repurpose it for something really special. Yeah. And it's been just a pretty awesome journey. And I'm excited to see where God continues to take me, where he continues to grow me. And, you know, I think in this season now, I don't want to be so afraid that I hold on so tightly to things that feel comfortable, and I miss out on the things that he could do and the ways that he could use me.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I'm really trying to push through at this point in my life. But I love sharing part of my journey because I really do feel a new freedom, but it also takes work, and I think it takes persistence. And when I know that I'm thinking too much about what other people think about me, or I'm worried about certain things too much, or my focus is on things that don't matter, I realize that like I really need to hone in on my relationship with God. If I'm afraid of people leaving, sometimes I think, okay, this makes sense given having endured a lot of loss as a kid and some of the transitions, but we just push through that because we're human. And today I just know that I'm not alone in doing that, and I don't have to do it all in my strength.
Yeah.
So many good points in there, Lauren. And I'm so thankful that I can testify to who you were at 15 and 16 years old and to the woman that you are now and how you have allowed God to do the work in you. But you've also put in the work yourself. And I think that's really important when we're talking about mental health because, it's either a lot of times we get stuck in the one or the other, like God should do all the work or I have to do all the work. But I think there's a really cool partnership that happens when we choose to surrender to God's plan, like you said, and it isn't always the way we want it or how we want it. But we have to do the work too, right? Like it's not that he's ever, and Curtis said the same thing. God doesn't ever, he can completely remove the pain and the things that we go through, but sometimes he doesn't. But he still will use it, and it will still be good. And so I love that you kind of said all those things because I think they're so important.
Yeah, I'd love to know just in some detail what that work looks like. What just practically, what does that look like to work through those emotions, that healing, that loss that you face? What did that work look like for you?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think the first part of it is really starting to be more self-aware. And I think you can have self-awareness and not a selfishness and a self-focus because we have to be mindful and self-aware in order to create changes in our life versus be self-focused. And
That's
then I
good.
think,
Yeah. Well, and I'd love for you just to go further. Because how does one become self-aware if you're not self-aware? I think everybody thinks I'm self-aware, but I can look at you and be like,
Yeah, you're not.
not quite. So it's like, does somebody help you with that? Do you just I don't know, what's that process like?
I think when a lot of times we just kind of automatically respond to things. Like if I'm driving in the car and I was thinking about that and I was thinking of different things and I'm just used to driving, so I can easily do that and I just operate because that's the way I'm used to.
Yeah,
and
like
then
an
I
autopilot.
and I miss scenery, I miss things around me.
Yeah.
And so I think it's almost an intentional connection with like ourself in the moment. And I say using our 5 senses to do that.
Yeah.
But then the awareness of okay, sometimes I think we can almost get this wrong. Okay, so this is a bit of my opinion, but empathy is seeing something through somebody else's eyes and perspective. We tend to see things as we are, not as they are.
Yeah.
And so when we're able to look at, given this person's history, their life, their circumstances, how would they feel? I think that can help one with self-awareness when we really know what's going on inside of me, outside of me, and what's going on with other people. And so that's, I think, a huge part of it. Like, why am I reacting? Almost a self-inquiring process of why am I thinking this? Why might I be reacting this way? And I go even a step further is that I think a lot of times, I hear this a lot as a therapist, but I think we do this as people. I can know something and not feel something. Like, I know this, but I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But we so want to. And so when you just think at a very basic level, when we've thought something so many times or done something so many times, it creates a neural pathway and it creates a connection. And so we're having to retrain our brain and to rewire and to relearn.
Yeah.
But once we do that over and over and over again, we begin to then change and learn new behavior in relevant context. So I think even an example of my marriage is that when Brian and I would fight with each other at first, or if there was a disagreement, I would feel internally so much anxiety, I would want to leave. And that was my, fight or flight response kicking in.
Right.
But then learning how to sit with the discomfort of the feelings and that it was safe was really helpful. So I had to know in that situation, I feel this way, but not automatically respond to it.
That's good.
Yeah, that's
a
really
good point.
And it really made a huge difference for us.
Yeah.
And I think too, another thing I was even thinking about this last night is that I say this because I know that our marriages mirror, right? Like Christ. Essentially, we learn to be more Christ-like, self-sacrificial, not martyrs. And so anyway, one of the things that I think is so healing even in that is if you are married and this person is the one you're going to be with forever. So I think there's such a safety and comfort for me in having loss is that at least I know that throughout my life or Brian's life, we're going to be together and we're in each other's corner. And I think that there's a lot of comfort in that when there's, we don't always feel that in other areas of our life.
Yeah.
That's a really good perspective, because I think a lot of times we look at our spouse as the enemy when we're fighting in mental health things, right? Because you're going off of a feeling, and when you're upset, then your spouse becomes your enemy. But really, if you could switch that perspective and go, cool, my spouse is actually this permanent person that I get to have forever, and there's a safety in that and a relief in that if we would see it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I love what you said about, like, you can feel the feelings, feel them, but that doesn't mean you have to react according to them or respond from that feeling. You can sit in it and then process through it. But if I think that, I don't know, it's super special to have a spouse number one, have a spouse that is in your corner, right? And that you're in this for life with. What would you say to the person that feels alone? Like, I don't have anybody to work through this with, or I don't even know who I can trust. I don't know who to process this with. Like, what do you say to them?
I think that's a great question. I think one, knowing that we're never alone, God is always with us. I think that is so helpful to me.
Yeah.
And when I look back on times and I see, I love to share this part, because I know before Jesus was going to be arrested, he was so nervous, right? He's about to be separated from the Father, that he's sweating blood. And I think to know that the creator of the universe felt all the same feelings that we feel, and there's not a sin in that, that there's nothing wrong with that, is very comforting to know that we're not alone in pain and struggles, and he knows what it's like to live some of the same struggles that we have.
Yeah.
And I think there's such a power in that too. And also, one, I think sometimes being single allows us to do work in order to find that person, or if that's not what God has for us, just to have relationship with other people. Because if we really focus on relationship with the Lord and how, he sees us, and then doing our own work, I think just at a therapeutic level of what has gone on in our nervous system, why are we thinking certain things, that can be really helpful. So sometimes the seasons of singleness can definitely be a blessing, even if we don't feel that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's good. I know Noah always says, my feelings are real, but they're not always right.
Yeah, so true.
So I stole that from him. But I wanted to go back to the moment where you were sitting in the car with Brian, and you said that you really felt God's love in that moment. Because I think a lot of times when we're struggling with our emotions or our thoughts, it's because we're having a hard time really receiving God's love. And so do you think it took a person like Brian for you, but maybe in other people, it's these people that come into our lives that love us in those pits, love us in those dark places? Or do you think it was just a readiness that you had, or what do you think it was that got you to the moment to be receptive to that love?
Man, I think that's such a good question. And I think it's a little bit of both. If I look back at like seasons of my life, where there's all these little seeds. Very quick example. I just remember being a bank teller in college. I think it was 18 or 19. And this sweet boy walked in, and he was probably a couple years older than me. He started talking about tithing, and he talked about the Lord. And I just think of, different people like that, like at different places in my life, that there was, love and not judgment, but they were so strong and firm in their faith and foundation.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That they could hold like tightly to what they knew to be true, but also to love other people. And so I think with Brian, definitely there was a readiness. And I think I was very open and receptive, and had really been, through a season of, my life is not going well because I'm not doing this life well without you, God.
Yeah.
Even though on the outside or the world, it could look as if things are going well, right? I mean, I'm in graduate school, and I had a degree, and I'm working towards a career, but those are just things. I think when we look at what success or things going well really is, it's, what's my relationship with God looking like right now? And my relationship with people. And so for that moment, definitely, I think Brian was like a bridge for me, right? I mean, he's human, but I think God can use ordinary people to do pretty amazing things.
Yeah, he does it all the time.
Yeah, he does. And I love that he's, you're just driving along. I just wonder what your conversation was like. 'Cause he's like, are you ready to rededicate? Like, yeah, let's do it.
Knowing Brian, that could be true.
Let's do it right now. I love that.
I know.
It's so cool. It's such a great story. I love it. Lauren, I would love for you just to share, like you said, when you were 18, 19, you thought, I want to be in, the mental health field. What does that look like? How did you know which direction to go? What did that look like for you?
I initially wanted to be a lawyer, and now looking back, I'm like, I don't know if that's a good fit for me. And then I quickly, changed, and it just felt like my undergraduate degree was in psychology. And then I started working right after I took 4 years off. I was on a crisis team. I was an intensive case manager. And so I got my feet wet and really felt like I just want to keep pursuing this. And then went to school. So I looked into different programs and saw what that would look like, and chose more of the route that I went, was getting a master's in counseling psychology. There's different avenues to be a counselor if somebody wants to, but I knew that that's really the route that I wanted to go and to pursue. And it just seemed to work well too. I was working full time and going to school. So the program and the degree that I chose worked really well with me being able to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. What does that look like today?
So today I've been in a private practice. I guess it's been 7 years. I think that's right. And I work a lot with clients that have had experiences of trauma, addiction, anxiety, depression, grief, and loss. And all the things we really can struggle with as human.
Yeah.
How do you know someone's ready for change?
If they're ready for change? Well, there's stages of change, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good question. Sometimes there's pre-contemplation, there's contemplation, and we could kind of keep going.
Yeah.
But I think a big thing too is, what is their willingness? What is their openness? If somebody is completely unwilling to hear something, unopen to hear anything, and doesn't want to do anything different, that would make it really hard. Even if they're struggling with something, but we see okay, their wheels are turning, their wheels are spinning, they're tired of doing the same thing. Even if they keep engaging in it, we can see change.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I know, it is interesting.
And you just got to stick with it. As their counselor, just to, it's kind of the same thing in friendships or even with your spouse. If I see, I can think about myself, I want to be fit and look good all day long, but do I work out every day? No, but my husband, he's not like, Kaitlin, you're just ridiculous. I don't want to hear about it. There's he's going to stick with me and be like, well, if you want to go work out, you should go work out, Kaitlin. It's good for you. It's I don't know. I'm going with this in my mind, but it's the same as a counselor. You could get really frustrated and be like, you have the tools. I am helping you. Why don't you do this?
Go help yourself.
And maybe it comes to that at some point. I don't know. But, at the same time, I love that you're like, you know what? I'm here with you along the way, no matter if we're here for a year, 5 years, 15, whatever. That's cool. And even if somebody doesn't have, we've talked about the security of a spouse, they have the security of their counselor. I'm here for you, and I'm not going anywhere. I am in your corner. I love that.
Yeah. I think there's something that in that endurance and not just in suffering, but in love.
Yeah.
Because I think so often we quit in those love moments, and part of love is enduring. And so I think whether it's God enduring with us, like he did for you and for me and for Kaitlin, but then also people get to come in our lives and endure. And that's love too. That's God's love through people, right? That they would endure with you. And so I think it's such cool full circle moments for you just in your story of you had a willingness and a readiness to be open to the Lord and to be open to the conversation with Brian. And now you get to do the same thing with other people of evaluating their willingness and readiness to change.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were saying that, it's interesting because I don't think he doesn't ask us to have all the answers, but I think he just asks us to be open, to be willing, and we can move into a relationship with him. And a lot of times I think sometimes we feel like I have to have all of this figured out before I take the first step. When all we have to do is take one step at a time.
That's right. That's it.
Preach it. That's it.
Well, that moment with Jesus in the garden and that sweating blood, I think about that moment. And I don't think it was hard just because it was lonely or because he knew what he was about to endure, but I think there was a dying to self. I think it was the surrender, because I don't know about y'all, but in my work with the Lord, it's the dying to Darbi and Darbi's way. And I think Jesus had to go, okay, I think there's a better way, but you don't, God. And so I'm going to stay in this moment and I'm going to just die to my flesh in this. And I'm going to die to my selfishness or my pride or whatever it was. You know, I think there's a work involved when we have to say self dies, right? I die so that Christ lives in me.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes the hardest thing of all to do.
Yeah.
Is to say, not me, but you, God. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about marriage, what do we tend to honestly get most upset with is I want things my way.
That's exactly it. Same with our kids and even in friendships sometimes. We are self-focused, right? But there's a difference in being self-aware and self-focused.
Absolutely.
Man, so many good points. Could talk about this for a while.
And I love, Lauren, I just, as we finish up, I love that, you know, when it comes to just our mental health, it's something that sometimes feels like you're always dealing with and you can just never, not necessarily move on from, but it's like something you just carry, you know, just in people I talk to, it's like just the heartache that you faced or the things that have been done to you or the things you've seen. Like, I'm like, what? You just like, you live with that. That's, you know, it's just, it's so sad to me. But I love, Lauren, that you know, the things that you have faced, giving them to the Lord, He has now turned them into things that now are good things. Like, you help other people because of the things that you've been through. And you could easily say, no, like, I'm hurt. I don't want to hear what you have to say. And maybe it's from a hurt place. I don't want to go back to that hurt in my own life. But instead, you've chosen to say, Lord, use my story and you know, I can be empathetic, you know, and I can be compassionate and I can help you from a place of experience as well, you know, and I love that you just haven't kept that to yourself, but you're letting the Lord use that. I really admire that about you.
Thanks, Kaitlin.
And trusting Him with all the seeds, right? Because you don't get to see the harvest of all these people, but you're planting all the seeds like that boy did for you at the bank.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
So full circle moments there, but... Anyway, thank you so much, Lauren, for making time to just share with us all the wisdom that you have and just your testimony to God's goodness in your life and His faithfulness. And
keep doing it.
I know. That's what we're here for.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Well, we'll see you guys next week on Say So Podcast.